So I welcome you to a joint Hebrew University and TUM Campus Heilbronn webinar on decision making. And we picked the topic from neurons to organizations. Welcome from the two organizations, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and TUM Campus in Heilbronn. We have a few house rules. The webinar will be recorded and posted online for those parts where the speakers will allow that. Please mute yourself. That makes it easier for the others to listen, and use the chat function to pose any questions during that moment. We all know that on a day-to-day way, a myriad of decisions is taking, whether very small or very large. And these decisions range from choosing a beverage in the coffee shop to the decisions pertaining to the livelihood of humanity. So if one really looks at it, then we have a few decisions in actually who makes the decisions. How did the decision made actually come about? Was a decision based on an impulse or on a careful assessment, or has a decision a minor or major consequence, and what's minor and major from what perspective? These are but a few questions around decision making. To showcase this intriguing variety of topics, we have decided to jointly present you this webinar, because under the heading we will have three presentations that look at the gamut of decision making from its neurological basis, over decisions in and from individual consumers, to really complex organizational arrangements. I'd like to thank the presenters, Professor Lilach Avitan from Hebrew University of Jerusalem. The details you will find in the invitation to the webinar, where she is an assistant professor in brain sciences, and her formal background is in computer science and statistics. And she studies the neural basis of complex behavior and uses the zebrafish as the animal model to study that in a very interesting way when I was last visiting the lab. Professor Martin Meissner is a professor of digital marketing at Technical University of Munich, and works here at the TUM campus in Heilbronn. His research focuses on social media, visual attention, as well as virtual augmented reality. And he'll talk about investigating consumer decision-making. And last but not least, Professor David Wuttke. He's a professor of supply chain management, also at Technical University of Munich. And if you see in the slides, both at the same location, TUM campus in Heilbronn, he studied mathematics before turning into business administration, and is now assistant professor for supply chain management, and he will talk about his topic, decision-making in supply chain management. So I would like to ask thank the organizers for putting that seminar together, for Lennart Schibilla and Bettina Berscheid, to getting the webinar together, taking care of the logistics and the many tasks in the background, and above all, the Dieter Schwarz Foundation to support and strengthen the collaboration between TUM Campus Heilbronn and Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And without further ado, I would like to go to the first speaker. It's the neural basis of decision-making by Lilach Avitan, as already introduced, and you take over the screen. That would be great.
Okay, so basically what we are doing in the lab is asking some very fundamental questions about decision-making. And it's very few minutes we will spend together. I'll try to convince you that actually looking at very simple animals can really help us address questions regarding the underlying rules of decision making and how these rules are actually implemented in the brain. So basically we come up from the notion that any interaction with the environment, that's really an intelligent behavior, right? An animal and us as well, we need to interact with the environment and to reach our goals. And we are asking few questions with regard to this interaction. One, what are the rules that govern us to take a particular sequence of actions toward a goal? And second, what shapes these rules to acquire this goal, right? One can think of, okay, I want now to go and grab a cup of coffee. What is the sequence of actions I need to take? And why do I choose this sequence and not others to reach this particular goal? And the last question is, how can we do that? Or how can the network, the neural network, can actually implement such complex behavior that requires a sequence of actions? So in the lab, what we do is we are studying it using a very, very tiny animal, and that's the zebrafish larva, actually. So this is the zebrafish larva. Funnily enough, it doesn't have the zebra lines because we are using this mutant that is lacking any pigments on the skin, which allows us a direct access to the brain because the skin now becomes very transparent. And you will see that this is roughly a 4 millimeter long animal, so it's very small. And one can ask, okay, what kind of decision does this animal have to do on a daily basis? And I'll say that the animal has to confront very complex decisions from very early days of life in order to survive. In fact, this animal has found a solution to a problem that we as humans haven't found the solution yet. And what is this problem? Okay, so here we're seeing that's what the fish is doing for a living. The fish is going and hunting their food. So we are seeing here a fish that the movie is slowed down for your eyes. So it happens on a much faster scale. But basically what we are seeing here is that the fish is sitting in a dish with a lot of prey, and it identifies a target. And then within a few steps, a few decisions that the animal has to make, it has to shoot the target. We as humans have not really found a way to shoot a target that is not, say, predicted in its trajectory. Okay, so the trajectory of the target is not known because these are all living animals. Okay, and the fish is able to orient toward the target, and within a very small set of actions has to capture the prey. Okay, so that's a question that had we known the algorithm behind this problem, we would be able to design an artificial agent that can shoot any target moving in any direction, basically, without any predicted trajectory. One thing that we noticed is that this behavior is not that simple, that it's not just a simple behavior, because as you can see, sometimes the fish is approaching the target, and then something really weird happens. Suddenly the fish decides that perhaps it's not the best scenario, and it just leaves the scene. And this again raises some questions about what is the underlying rule that made the fish move away after it invested some time in approaching the target. Okay, so that's one kind of a behavior that we are looking at. Another behavior that we are looking at is social behavior. So here you see a few fish that are freely swimming in a dish, but they are not swimming randomly, right? They are swimming in a group. And this is also another question that is super important for us humans. How can we have a set of individuals flying or swimming or moving in a very condensed area, in a very condensed pattern, without them clashing and colliding one with the others? So these are two very distinct behaviors that the underlying decisions behind this or the algorithm behind the decisions is still unknown for us. Okay, so we have these wonderful behaviors that we can capture and we can track and we can rigorously analyze. now comes the question, how can we go, what happens at the neural level, right? So the fish is not just small, it has a lot more advantages. For example, if we zoom in onto the fish brain, we see very big two eyes because most of the behaviors are visually guided. And we are using some genetic tools that actually labels all of the neurons in the brain of the fish. Okay, and it labels them with an indicator that kind of reports where the neurons are and how they are active. So we will first see where the neurons are. So now we are going to travel inside the brain of the fish, and every single pearl here is a neuron, basically. So at this age, the fish has about 100,000 neurons, which we can image simultaneously. As the animal is running and swimming and performing this behavior, so that we can really track what the neurons are doing when the behavior is actually elicited. And how can we do that? Basically, to image the brain, we need the head fixed. The head can't move, because then it will be very hard to image the neurons. So basically what we do is we designed for the fish a mini home cinema, basically. So the fish is watching a movie that we project, and only the head is fixed, the tail is free to move. Okay, and we are recording the behavior of the fish, so we can record the tail flicks. From the tail flicks, we understand where the fish wants to move, and this is then fed back to the computer that shifts the world for the fish. So basically, the fish is swimming in a virtual arena. It feels like as if it is swimming freely, in a sense, while its head is being fixed and the neurons are being recorded. And this is an example how it looks in reality. So here we see 8 planes from the brain. Now the head is fixed, but you can see the tail is moving. And here we are recording the activity from all of these neurons in the head of the fish. Okay, so this is the kind of tools we can use to ask questions about what happens when the visual world is changing. How does the animal elicit a behavior towards the stimulus we are projecting? And what is the mechanism to, because sometimes we can see that there is something occurring in the visual scene, but the animal decides not to act upon. And then comes the question, what happened in the brain when the animal decided not to take an action compared to the cases where the animal decided to take an action upon the visual cues. I'll finish up by saying that we are really delighted to have this collaboration with TUM, and in fact we were running a very super cool systems neuroscience course in TUM just in April. Back then it was the dark days of a lot of masks, but we had a lot of smiling faces on the board. But then afterwards in September, we had another course that was without the masks. It was beautiful. We went, we were in Munich, and then we moved to the mountains, and it was really fantastic to join forces with the German students and run this course together. It was really fantastic for us. So yes, that's it for me.
For this fascinating presentation, and I'm very happy how much you could bring over from the impressions that I found and had in your lab, and how important it is to really understand the neurological basis of the decision making in such a clever design, a virtual cinema for a nascent zebrafish, to understand how the visual impressions actually work. And I think that is a very good intro, in a way, to our next presentation, because we will follow up through all the presentations, and I urge you to bring along questions in the chat if you have. But I would like now to go to Martin Meissner. As we have said, he's looking at visual impressions. Probably doesn't fix the consumers and give them a virtual cinema, but he's investigating consumer decision making. And I think that is an interesting addition to what we have heard already. So go along, Martin. And I'm looking forward to David Wuttke's presentation on decision making in supply chain management. I think you will bring us into a field of what kind of decisions are to be made, and then we can go into the round of questions. Thanks, Martin, and the floor is open for David, please.
Yes. Thank you very much for the nice introduction, and thank you very much, Helmut, for and Leonard, for putting this wonderful webinar together. I learned so much already about zebrafish, and it's always, again, nice to see, Martin, what you're doing with marketing stuff. It's always tough to be the third presenter then after two very strong presentations. So I'm afraid I don't have so cool video animations, so cool, marketing, social media slides, but I can talk about supply chain management, and that makes me happy at least. Now, when we talk about supply chain management, I think something has changed the last 4 years, maybe. So one day in the 1990s, or at the time of the 1990s, it used to be that only the experts would care about supply chains, right? Like the operations managers. And if you talk about supply chain management, you're like, what are you talking about? What does it mean? It's supply chain management. It's firm business. And now these days we feel like, oh, we are all supply chain managers. At least we feel like we have a good understanding of the complexities that arise in global trade. Like, when a product is not there in Germany at the moment, we are facing severe shortages in terms of medication. I don't know what the situation in Israel is at the moment. Here it's crazy. It's products that you could produce in abundance that you can't get in the pharmacy. It's really strange. We've faced other stockouts, and everyone is about, okay, supply chains are important. No, we've been talking about it for 20 years, and now, unfortunately, something bad had to happen. So now we talk about it. Now, what is a supply chain? A supply chain is, in a sense, a set of firms that are vertically connected. You could see it as in this slide. I don't know. Can you see my pointer? Let's see. I think I can. Let me just switch on pointer. Does it show my pointer? Maybe you can see it now. So anyways, the supply chain, you can think about it. There's someone who's producing raw materials, mining, then some suppliers, maybe component manufacturers, then manufacturers, maybe even distributors, wholesalers, retailers, and then the consumer. And so what marketing is concerned is really this retailer-consumer link, I would say. It's a very important aspect of a supply chain, but as I don't get tired of mentioning, it's just one piece of supply chain. The supply chain is somewhat bigger. And there are many things that are going on. And what I want to point out is we've seen very impressively so for Martin that if just one individual is involved, right, how complex is it already, the decision-making, how many aspects come into play? And now in supply chain, we look sometimes at the even bigger picture and ask, so how difficult then is it if you work with multiple organizations? Let me try to map it down in one simple slide of the complexities, the dynamics that may arise in the context of supply chain. So when we talk about supply chains, we often like to say, consider a manufacturer and a retailer. They're doing business, manufacturer needs to decide on how much inventory to have and so on and so forth. But we often talk about it on a firm level. But the truth is, when it comes to decision-making, each firm, we can zoom in, and each firm consists of multiple functions. I think it was Porter who talked about the value chain maybe for the first time. And he said there are primary activities, inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, services. And there are support activities, including, for instance, firm infrastructure or technology development. And all of those areas are important. They all need to be aligned and they all need to pull in the same direction. So it's not just that in a supply chain we have multiple firms, but we can open up the firms as like boxes and see the many different departments or functions, activities therein. Now, let's dig a bit deeper. Then we see once we open it up, you can already imagine, if we pick an example, for instance, operations. Operations is also a structure, typically a hierarchy where you have some head of operations with assistants. Then you have various functional areas within the operations, for instance, assembly, quality, or inventory. And now within those, you have different groups which are working there. For instance, component assembly, final assembly. Now we can dive even deeper into those boxes in the organigram, if you will. And then we see there are people. That can be managers, that can be workers, employees. There are people. And one of the key elements is, in the end, no matter what the objective of a supply chain, what is the objective of a firm, of a function, of an activity, it's people who decide. And if we really want to understand decision-making in supply chains, there's no way around it than to really dig deep and ask, who are the people who make decisions and how might they be influenced? There are biases on each level. There are biases on the individual level, on the functional level, on the firm level, and on the supply chain level. If we want to understand how decisions are made, we have to look at those levels. Now, when I say we want to understand in supply chain management, we do a lot of research that relates to making good decisions and making decisions in general. Let me try to phrase it in very abstract and generic terms. Then I would say you could broadly cluster the literature and the research into three paradigms. Normative, it's a lot around game theory, about OR, operations research, where we try to say, what is it that firms should do? How should they decide? What should be the best outcome? What would they do if they seek to maximize profit, for instance? That's normative research. We have a lot of descriptive research going on, besides surveys, a lot of game theory trying to explain or just to describe basically what's going on. Explain is the wrong word. It's more of describing of what is an equilibrium, how could it look like? How could possible equilibrium look like? And we also love explanatory and theory building research, where we try to test hypotheses, for instance, using experiments. And so it's quite common in terms of research paradigms that what we do is we develop game theoretical models to understand what's going on and to prescribe and normatively say, how should firms, how should managers decide? And then we do theory testing and experiments to show that this is not what happens. In fact, when you look into the Nobel Prizes in economics, you would see that up to 2000, there's been a lot of Nobel Prizes that went to researchers who said people are rational and therefore they will make the following decisions. Then there was somewhat a paradigm shift, and out of a sudden people got the Nobel Prize for saying people are not rational and we can predict how they deviate, and that's why we need to study more, and that's how we need to adjust the theory. Now in operations management and supply chain management, we reached that point finally in the 21st century where we say, look, we can come up with very good analytical models that help us to understand the dynamics, the mechanism, and game theory is super state-of-the-art as a research method. At the same time, if we really want to understand what's going on, how do firms decide, we need to take a behavioral perspective. We need to challenge this. We need to test it in a lab, in the fields, or with a frame field experiment and ask, what is really going on? How do people really decide, as opposed to how should they decide? What I would like to distinguish on the next 3 slides is the macro level. That is more, you could say, on the level of how should or what should happen, right? What would be the decision on the firm level? How should it be done? What is probably the way that we teach at school at the moment, that we say this on a macro level is how you should decide. And then there's the micro level that is more about the individual, about what's going on. Let me give you 3 examples. First level, supply chain level. There's been much work going on since 2000 about supply chain coordination. With supply chain coordination, what we mean is that different firms have different objectives. Right? Retailer wants to maximize their profit. Manufacturer wants to maximize their profit. Now, when it comes to deciding on how much inventory to stock, for instance, at the manufacturer, how much to produce, then the retailer would love to have a manufacturer with a lot of inventory, because then I can always replenish. I never have a stock out. I can sell more. But the manufacturer does not like to have too much inventory, because yes, they could sell a lot, but the retailer could run into a situation where demand is not as strong, and then the manufacturer would be taking all the risk because they produce so much and the retailer is not buying it. So from a supply chain perspective, from a retailer's perspective, it might very well be the case that they would love to have a lot of inventory safety stock at the manufacturer, but the manufacturer itself doesn't want to take the risk. What could you do? Now, you could come up with a forcing contract that says, manufacturer, you have to do the following service level, otherwise you're fired, I don't want you anymore. Rarely happens. It's really not the idea of supply chain management that we are forcing partners into doing some action. Instead, people came up with very intelligent contracts that are very simple, such as a buyback contract or revenue sharing contract. Example, revenue sharing means the retailer says, look, I'm going to buy products at a smaller price from you, but if I sell them, you will get some of my revenue. This way, retailer and manufacturer figure out a way of how to align the incentives, how out of a magical situation or a game theoretical model, if you will, they found a solution such that the retailer will order more, manufacturer can produce more, everyone is better off, and the risk is shared through the revenue sharing contract appropriately, and so are the rewards. So in theory, very good idea. And on a macro level, we just asked, what is the optimal contract for supply chains? Now, a study by Katop in 2007 showed, well, we can have different contracts, and in theory, they are equivalent, but when people make decisions in the lab, it differs how they are framed. Revenue sharing, the one I just mentioned, buyback contract, slightly different version, mathematically equivalent. A game theoreticist would say, it doesn't matter which one you use, they lead to the equivalent outcome. We can prove it mathematically. Behaviorally, there is a difference. And that is what the Katop study showed, that there is a difference on the micro level, which one we prefer and how we decide depending on the framing. Likewise, there's been a very nice study by Chu et al. From 2007, which went into the direction of inequity aversion. And that shows that if firms are, or managers display some form of inequity aversion as a bias, this will not make the situation worse, but it can make the situation better, because we can get a certain alignment of incentives if I care about the well-being of someone else. And let's face it, that's not too unrealistic that if I do business with someone else, it's not my intention to screw them, but it's my intention that everyone is better off. Okay. Next, firm level decisions, for instance, product recall decisions, the perhaps most important quality decision. When do I recall a defective product from the market? Now, if you think about cars or medicine, you would have hoped that the recall happens immediately after you became aware of the issue at place and that you know there's a danger, and I would recall it. If you know Fight Club, you know, it's been a bit time since that movie was out, but if you know it, you know that this is a decision that is often a bit based on decision, and you can delay it very well. So firms don't recall a product once they know it's defective, but they sometimes delay it. What are the drivers to accelerate it? When do I recall it very quickly? How do employees filter information and interpret it? Because there is rarely a situation that a car is really dangerous. Yes, there has been the diesel scandal. Yes, that was a clear one. Yes, there has been the Takata scandal with the airbags. Yes, that is a clear one. There are very many gray zones, however, and the firm has to decide, how do I interpret it? And that goes back to the individual decision-making with a very severe implication for the supply chain, but it's the individuals who decide. And third example, functional level inventory decisions, decisions under uncertainty. How much do I order before I know what exactly the demand is that's going to be realized? Do I order more than what I expect to sell? Do I bet on uncertainty? Am I risk averse? again, we can look on the optimal inventory level from a normative perspective and say, this is what you should do. And that's actually what I'm teaching in production and logistics. But I can tell you based on research that the individual decision-making differs. And there is one very strong effect that's called anchoring. If I tell you the demand is going to be 50 units tomorrow, plus minus 10, and there's a standard deviation of 10, say, even if I told you this is an extremely valuable product and we could calculate that you should plan for the upper end of the possible demand realizations, well, if I tell you it's about 50 plus minus 10, you are anchored on 50 and you might go for 52, but not to what the normative predictions might say of 59 or so, because we have an insufficient adjustment. That's what research shows. Now, let me also make some, or give some overview of my own research, and just very briefly 4 studies that relate to decisions and the individual level versus the firm level. First is a study that we published in 2018 on initiating supplier new product development projects, where we used a behavior investigation. We wanted to know, how can you get your suppliers to invest in new product development to improve products that they're selling to you? How can you make them stick to a project that they start and not abandon it? We came up with a game theoretical model of 2 alternative incentive schemes, which we found to be equivalent. And then we went the next step and tested it in a lab to see which one works best. And we found that if you use a framing of a penalty, that you say, I penalize you if you stop the development process, that will lead to a more percentage of projects carried out to the end. However, then people are less likely to accept it in the first place because they are afraid of entering an agreement which has a penalty clause. If you use rewards, they are more likely to enter the same contract equivalently framed. However, they are less likely to carry it out through the end. Another one relates to actually the example I mentioned, recalls in the automotive industry, where we examine how long does it take for a firm from becoming aware of a product defect to recalling it. And we see 2 drivers here, actually using machine learning in our case. One is when you receive complaints through some official complaint websites. If they are formulated more neutral, then there seems to be more information, and then firms react faster based on that information. If it's about information they get or the sentiments they get through Twitter, where there's much more tweets going on and they're not all related to product defects, then it turns out the more positive the tweets are that I get, the better my reputation, the slower I am with recall, because the more I have to lose from making a recall decision. And so we see how firms delay decisions of recalling after they got aware of it based on information that is out there. 2 more studies. One is on the area of supply chain finance, where we use a game theoretical model. Another one, which was on the use of AR in production ramp-up context, which was on learning by individuals. I want to skip here for the interest of time, because I see we have only 5 minutes left. So let me just wrap it up. In supply chain management, on the one hand, we care about the very big picture about different firms, each firm, different functions, each function, different activities, and every time different people. But when it comes to decision-making, inevitably, we have to break it down to the very individual level to understand how they react, what are their biases, how do they deviate from normative perspectives and predictions. Thank you very much for the attention. And by the way, it's very cool seeing in the audience so many familiar names. That's really awesome. Also many of our students. Very cool. Thank you.